Hello, dear viewers, you are on the channel Life Cucumber Brick. Good mood to you, and enjoy listening. Grace, I don't understand. What do you mean Batty isn't home? Grace, the young, beautiful woman, was preoccupied with her nails and didn't answer right away. That means your daughter threw another tantrum on me. You've got to get her to a doctor, that's for sure. I can't live under these conditions. Darren sighed several times, trying not to snap in a calm voice, asked, "Explain in human terms what happened." Grace finally put the shelf aside and began to tell. She showed up from her gymnasium and turned up the music in the room. And, she knew very well that I was still asleep. She did it out of spite. Wait, she comes at 3. What's sleeping at that time? What time did you get in last night? And don't lie, I'll look at the cameras. Grace's face flashed. What does it matter what time I got in? We're talking about your daughter's behavior. We'll continue this conversation after I find out what time you married woman came home. What kind of interrogation? Well, it's just a little late with the girlfriends. Darren looked at her silently. Well, it was 4 o'clock. A little more specifically. Grace jumped up. I don't remember, I wasn't looking at the time. And what does it matter if your daughters need psychiatric help? Darren said in an icy voice. What my daughter needs, and I will decide for myself. She turned on some music, and that's how you woke up. Yes, I went and told her to turn it down. She almost came at me with her fists. Naturally, I had to put her in her place. How? Did you hit her? Nobody hit her. I just pushed her a little, that's all. So what happened next? I explained to her how children should behave. She called me names and threatened me. Then she broke free and ran away. She broke free? You were holding her. Grace looked at him frightened. No, just. Darren went to the window. It was getting dark outside. A blizzard was howling in a way that made it sound like an animal was howling. He turned around slowly. If anything happens to Batty Tina, I'll cut you into pieces. He said it calmly, but Grace recoiled. Everyone in town knew about Darren's criminal past. He quickly dialed a number. Felix run to me, and anyone you can get hold of, take them with you. Now we're going to have to take Darren on something serious. Felix, settle down, the 90s are over. Batty's gone. Shit, we'll be there soon. It was in the 90s when they met Felix. That's when Darren helped him, literally, to keep the prisons clean. Since then, Felix had always been there for him. First as a friend, and then as Darren's friend and head of security. In addition, Felix was Batty's godfather. At one point, Felix almost got married. Eva, Darren's wife, introduced him to her best friend. They started a relationship that made you want to light a fire. And then Felix fell off the wagon. Whether it was his youth or something else. Anyway, Maria's girlfriend Eva caught him a week before his wedding with some girl. Felix almost got down on his knees to prove that she was a common Cloflina, but Maria was relentless. Eva kept in touch with her for a while because her friend left right after the scandal. And then, when Eva died in childbirth, the connection was cut off. Darren didn't even know how to inform Maria of her friend's death, and he didn't really look for it because he didn't see or hear anything of grief. 8 years had passed since then. Felix never married. Darren knew he had affairs, but nothing serious. But Batty Felix, on the other hand, had a crush on him. Darren was just getting dressed when the doorbell rang. It was Felix. The others will be here in a minute. What's the matter? Darren waved his hand. You don't know. My wife thinks she's the center of the world again. Grace, who came out to see who was here, said indignantly, How dare you talk about me like that? You better not be on your knees begging for forgiveness later. Darren walked over to her, taking her by the chin. Pray, Grace. Prayer is the only thing that will help you right now." Grace jerked her head free of his hand and stepped back. She glared angrily at Felix as she sprinted out of the hallway. They began methodically combing through all the places where the girl might be hiding. Her phone was at home, so Batty had run away in a hurry. Darren cursed himself with the last words. After all, he knew that there was a cold war between his daughter and Grace. No to talk to the child, to listen to her. All work came first. He was always afraid of losing one contract or the other. In fact, when he married Grace, he hoped that a woman would replace Batty's mother. And as it turned out, she became the main enemy. They had already been searching for over 2 hours. It finally got dark outside. Felix approached Darren. He, hiding his eyes, said, "Darren, we should call the police." Darren only now realized that they might not find Batty, ever. He had a terrible panic attack, and he yelled, "Felix, so-call. What are you waiting for?" He listened faintly to Felix on the phone, and his mind wandered to the memory of how often children had been stolen for ransom and not always treated as they should have been. Darren tried to push the thoughts away. Nothing like that would happen to them. Batty was just resentful of the whole world and lurking somewhere. It had to be that way and no other way. When night fell at Darren's, her heart began to skip a beat. Batty is a smart girl. She understands exactly what he is going through. And if she could, she would have shown up by now. It's winter outside, a blizzard. What to do? He ran from park to park. All the time, going back to the house, hoping that the girl had already returned. The TV showed a picture of Batty every 15 minutes. All the police were on their feet. He again raced to the park, where they liked to walk with his daughter. He didn't understand why he was so drawn there. This was the 3rd time he had been there. The paths were snowed in, and the wipers wouldn't show up until early in the morning. Darren walked slowly toward the river. There was a small dam here, and the water on this stretch was not frozen. He and Batty used to come here on weekends to feed the ducks, which were plentiful in the winter. He stopped in front of the water. The blizzard seemed to begin to subside. Stars appeared in the sky. Darren flinched, turned around. There was a boy standing in front of him. He was clearly not dressed for the weather, but he held himself well. Darren thought it was a common beggar and reached into his pocket. But the boy spoke again. "Are you looking for a girl, by any chance?" "Batty is her name." Darren rushed to him, grabbed him by the shoulders. "Where is she? Do you know anything about her?" The boy twitched in fright. "Let go, you're hurting me." Darren yanked his arms away from him. "Come with me, I found her here. She's all composed." I could hardly persuade her to come and see us, just as her mother was going to work in the night. And I gave her some tea. She told me her stepmother was beating her, and that's why she ran away. She also said that you would look for her. But I don't have to tell you where she is, because you don't care about her. You only love your stepmother. Darren, walking quickly beside him, asked, "Why did you tell me?" "She fell asleep, and in her sleep she cries and calls for you. Also, I think she has a fever." Darren almost ran. The boy pointed where and barely kept up with him. They approached an old little house. It looked more like a barn. "Is this your house?" "No, we're renting, but we'll definitely buy a house someday." The boy sighed dreamily, and they went in. Batty must have been awakened by the pounding of the door. She jumped up when she saw Darren. "Daddy," and immediately she cried. Darren picked her up in his arms and looked at the boy. There was something about his face that kept Darren looking at him. "What's your name?" "Jason." "I'll come see you tomorrow, Jason, and we'll continue to talk about your dream." "Is the house your dream?" Jason smiled. "It's mine and my mom's. We just paid off the loan she took out for my treatment. and now we can start saving for a house." Darren smiled, cradled his daughter in his arms, and walked out of the cabin. He almost ran to the car. And as he drove home, Felix called out. "Felix, Marshall call, but Batty seems to have a fever." "Thank God she's found him. I'll call them now." Grace didn't even leave her room. And Darren suddenly wondered what she was even doing here. She hasn't acted like a wife in a long time. His daughter isn't treated well, but her card had to be refilled all the time. Batty didn't want to let him go, but the doorbell rang. Darren heard the housekeeper, who came in the mornings for half a day, talking to someone. Felix poured into the room, followed by their Dr. Marshall. "No big deal. I think Batty's just overexcited." Felix stroked the girl's hair. "Batty, if anybody hurts you, call Felix. Felix will punish them all. No one else will do that. And even if it's Grace. And especially if it's Grace." Darren frowned. "Grace won't hurt anyone else. She's moving today." Felix raised his eyebrows. "Where?" "I have no idea. Away from here." After a hard conversation with Grace, Darren walked in on his daughter like a squeezed lemon. Felix was there. He lifted a finger to his lips. Batty was asleep. Darren pointed to the door. When Felix came out, Darren said, "Listen, would you like to go for a ride with me? I promised the guy who saved my Batty something." "Let's go." "Who's the guy?" "I'll tell you on the way." They drove up to the cabin. Felix got a call from someone. "Darren, you go ahead. I'll talk to you and I'll be there too." Darren nodded and headed for the door. Jason greeted him with a joyful exclamation. "It's you. I thought you weren't coming." "Well, I promised. I want, Jason, to fulfill your dream and your mother's dream." "Where is she?" "I'd like to go over the details with her." Jason didn't have time to answer. A woman came out of the kitchen. "Jason, are you talking to someone?" She looked at Darren and said, "You." "What are you doing here?" Darren even stepped back. "Maria." "Maria, is that you?" He looked around. "I don't understand." "You left." "I left for you." "And yet, yeah, no way. You're Batty's daddy." "I thought my son was making that story up." "No, he didn't." Darren shut up and stared at Jason, who didn't understand a thing. "And now I guessed what attracted me to you. You look like Felix," Maria immediately said. "Jason, go to your room." Then she turned to Darren. "So go away. We don't need anything, we're fine." That's when the door opened and Felix came into the cabin. "Where's the hero?" He hesitated. "Maria?" The woman sighed in frustration. "Why?" They were sitting at the table, drinking tea. Maria spoke, and the two men were silent, bowing their heads. "I left at the time, but when I found out I was pregnant, I came back. It was a difficult pregnancy. If it hadn't been for Eva, I don't know how I would have survived it all. And then she was gone. I was so lonely, so scared. Jason was born perfectly healthy. The problem started by the time he was 3. I sold my grandmother's apartment, took out a loan. We were treated for 4 years. Now everything is behind us, including the loan. But I hardly ever saw my son. I worked a double shift, so everything is great, and we don't need anything." Felix looked at her grimly. "So you think I'm such a jerk? I'm going to get up and leave." Maria shrugged her shoulders without looking at him, and Darren said, "You guys have such electric shocks between you that it's scary to sit next to each other. Maria, and look up the case of the Cloflin girls on the internet. They took a lot of them last year, and Felix's case is there. The girl really kind of accidentally hooked up with him in a cafe." Maria looked at Darren in surprise. "You're kidding." "No." "Okay, I'm going to go, and you guys figure it out." Felix is your son in the room, if anything. Maria threw an indignant look at him, but Darren pretended not to notice. Felix didn't show up at their house until a week later. His eyes were sparkling, and he looked a little like a madman. "Didn't you fire me yet?" Darren smiled. "No, though I should have." "Darren, there's a wedding in a week. Don't ask me anything. I'll tell you everything later. You'll be my son's godfather. I'll also introduce you to our maid of honor. She's wonderful. She's kind. She's beautiful." Darren laughed. Felix slowed down a little, but he shook his head stubbornly. "No, I know for a fact that you'll be crazy about her. In fact, you've made me the happiest man in the world. Thank you for that. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters. And thank you for listening to the story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, Life Cucumber Brick. All the best.